And I'm back. Told you I'd be back. Indeed. Just gonna put that on in the background.
Thank you for your patience. I've been asked to ask you to turn off your beepers, iPods, anything else.
It is Tuesday, March 6,
And we will go back in time
2018 at 3:49 p.m. The channel has 477 subscribers.
How many of you actually saw either of
Zaymans
these
has the
movies
most
in
copper
theaters?
shillings. I am Easandus
Okay,
has watched
good.
the most.
Crowd of old timers. I like
Yeah.
that. This is a video arcade. This is where I went to play games with a roll of quarters and my friends. I didn't yet have a video game console of my own, so that was pretty much it. This was a new invention called a VCR. It made it possible to see movies in the privacy of my own home. And this is me.
Jesus.
I know. So it was the summer after graduation from college, and I was home in Chappaqua, New York, in my old room in my parents' house, trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. And while my friends from Yale were, scattered doing things like going to join the Peace Corps, working on Wall Street, I thought that I wanted to make a computer game. And what happened there?
So, take this stuff out of the way for now.
Okay.
Let's see what's going on here.
This was my development system. Got my first Apple II in 1979. I was in high school, and upgraded from there to the Apple II Plus and the IIe. And having my own computer in my own room, which I could use whenever I wanted, really changed my life. Not only did I not have to go spend as many quarters in the video game arcade, but I could actually use this computer to make games myself, which was a lot of fun. And I started doing that in high school. I continued into college, and sorry. Oh, yes, that was the computer that I used in college to write papers. The Mac came in senior year, and so the Apple wasn't great for word processing. It only had capital letters, no lowercase, and you could only hold about 3 pages of text in memory at a time. So I used the Apple for the first 3 years, then the Mac came in, and I gratefully switched to that. But when it came to coding, to playing games and writing games, the Apple was definitely the #1 system. And this was the competitive field that I was thinking of plunging into. You can see Flight Simulator, Hitchhiker's Guide are up there. And one of these games is mine. Karateka had... I'd programmed Karateka in college, sophomore and junior years, which caused me to get really bad grades. Finally, it had been published, and Rotor-Run Software, the company that made my software programming dreams come true, was my first publisher, and I had actually gone out to California to Rotor-Run in the summer between junior and senior years to finish Karateka. That had been a great experience. It was really my first taste of adult life, and that was sort of the prototype for what I wanted to do again. Karateka was a #1 bestseller. The royalties enabled me to pay off my student loans right out of college, which was really nice.
Try that.
And kind of gave me a little bit of freedom. Instead of having to go out and get a job, I could sort of take a little time to think of what I really wanted to do. And I thought this was a good opportunity to do another game. So I kept a journal when I was in college, starting freshman year, and I wrote down what I thought and reflections. And memory is a funny thing. There's kind of a tendency, thinking back, to sort of smooth things over and imagine that I was smarter in retrospect than I actually was at the time. But rereading these journals kind of forces me to confront what I was really thinking about what was happening. And my big worry at this time, as a recent college graduate, was that the Apple II would turn out to be another fad, kind of like Rubik's Cube. I'd actually spent the summer between high school and college writing a book about how to win Rubik's Cube. I saw these other Rubik's Cube books on the bestseller lists, and I thought, well, there's a way to make some fast money. I'll write my own Rubik's Cube book. It'll be a bestseller, and here we go. So I did this. I sent my Rubik's Cube book to publishers, and they all rejected it, informing me that, of course, the Rubik's Cube craze was over. Last summer had been the time to write such a book, but not anymore. And I thought the same thing was, could very easily happen with the Apple II. I figured with Karateka, for the first time in my life, my timing had been good. I'd been lucky. I'd gotten it out just in time. But I figured now, I might be coming a little bit late to the party if I tried to do another game. Well, the other thing that was kind of holding me back was I really had this dream of making movies, someday writing screenplays, like my idol, Chris Columbus, who had written Goonies and Gremlins. I thought, I kind of wanted his life. And I thought if I spend a year writing another computer game, that's just going to delay me from finding out if I could make it as a screenwriter. But I took the plunge. I figured I just had to make a game fast before the computer games market disappeared. And these were some of my sources of inspiration. Lode Runner had been published by Broderbund Software a couple years before. It was a puzzle game. Anybody here? How many people here played it? Cool. So, it had 150 levels, and it came with a level editor that would enable you to make your own levels as well. And that kind of modular design, really excited me. Castles of Dr. Creep by Ed Hobbs, also a Broderbund game. That was another puzzle-solving game which had kind of a uniform quality. You could step on a pressure plate that would open a door, but activate another trap. So you really had to think about it. So these were really primary inspirations. Another one, of course, was my own game, Karateka, which had smooth, fluidly animated characters that, I know it doesn't look that fluid, does it? But at the time, we thought it was. And it also had a kind of cinematic presentation that, whereas the puzzle games were sort of abstract, this put you into a story, a very rudimentary story, but still, you had the feeling that you were kind of living an adventure, as well as trying to win the game. So my high concept idea, if you will, was Lode Runner plus Karateka, to kind of blend these two things together. And finally, I have to mention another source.
Give me the whip. Throw me the idol.
Could we turn up the volume?
No time to argue. Throw me the idol. I throw you the whip. Give me the whip. Adios, señor.
All right. Just wait for this.
Could anybody even see that screen? From where I'm standing, it looked black. No?
I don't think
No.
it's
But you've all seen the movie, right? Yeah. Yeah, this is actually a VHS capture, I believe, 1985 technology. Yeah, well, that was the opening sequence of Raiders of the Lost Ark, where Indiana Jones runs, jumps, tries to jump over a pit, misses, grabs on with his fingertips, and then pulls himself up and rolls under the gate just as it's closing. So that sort of visceral excitement was what I wanted to get into my game that I was about to make.
Hunter. Okay.
And whereas in Lode Runner and puzzle games like that, the character ran and jumped and did a lot of the same things that Indiana Jones was doing in the sequence, but it had this kind of floaty feeling. I wanted to do a game where if you missed, you could grab on and pull yourself up. If you fell too far, you would felt like it really hurt. So these things all sort of fed into what I wanted to do at the time. And by the way, the guy at Satipo, who falls on the spikes in the sequence, which you just didn't see, is played by Alfred Molina, who would go on to be in the Prince of Persia movie 25 years later. I thought that was very cool. Okay, this one we can see. So the game needed a setting, and it was on a visit to Broderbund during a brainstorming session that Gene Portwood, a veteran Disney animator, suggested, what about Alibaba, Sinbad? And that really grabbed my imagination because, of course, the 1001 Nights or the Arabian Nights, as they're called, but they're really old Persian tales. I'd read the childhood versions of these stories as a kid, and I'd seen movies like Warner Brothers' Ali Baba Bunny, comics like Howard the Duck, the Sinbad movies. It was sort of in all of our collective unconscious, but it hadn't been done yet in a computer game. And I thought, I went back, I reread the Arabian Nights, and it was just this deep well of characters and archetypes. And not only that, I thought it could actually translate to the Apple II computer screen, 280 by 192, because baggy pants and arches and columns, are something that you could actually represent clearly in 40 pixels. So this is how I started. The publisher had kind of been hoping that I would do Karateka 2, so they were a little disappointed.
I should change the text before moving
do
it.
an original IP.
You see that flash there?
Some things never change. But
and it's right here.
So I got started, and
okay.
To do the animation,
okay, so 100 went up here. It should really be more like 50 because Root is here.
But when I tried to make the character move, it became clear that I was not a trained Disney animator.
And now it's up there.
On Karateka, I've used a technique called rotoscoping, which goes back to silent film.
Okay.
This is basically the idea is to take a film and then take each frame and trace it, or somehow cartoonize it, and then make a sort of a flip book, which Muybridge did with a horse here. And Disney used this technique in Snow White, although they don't like to talk about it, for Prince Charming and Snow White. Ralph Bakshi had used it more recently in his Lord of the Rings animated film. And of course, I'd used it in Karateka. So I like the idea of using silent movie techniques for a game, partly because games were a new medium and they didn't have dialogue. You couldn't move the camera a lot. They had a lot of the same limitations that silent film had in the early days.
More people in the
So I shot some reference footage. That's my brother David. He was 16 years old in high school at the time. This is actually filmed in the Reader's Digest parking lot across the street from our high school.
The actual animations.
So I had him run, jump, and yeah, he wasn't the greatest athlete, but he was willing to do it for free. And
it's hilarious.
So whereas Karateka, I'd used Super 8 film. For this, I used the new technology of videotape. And a VHS camera at the time was not really an everyday piece of household equipment. It cost $2,500, which was more than twice the cost of my entire development system.
It's hilarious.
But I'd gotten my first credit card, Diners Club card, upon graduating from college. And I think one of my first purchases was this VHS camera, taking advantage of the 30-day back guarantee. I bought the camera, shot this footage, and then immediately mailed it back because I didn't want it in the house. I couldn't afford to own it. I felt a little guilty about it, but I was trying to keep costs down. So at this point, a year went by before I actually did anything with that footage. And the reason is because on the Apple II, we didn't have development environments. Even the tool that I used to draw shapes, to move pixels on the screen and kind of get things looking the way they should, that didn't exist. I had to code that myself, and as well as the tools to capture frames of animation and replay them and move them around the screen. So all that took time. And at the same time, I was negotiating with Rotorbund to try to get a deal that would enable me to get out of my parents' house, where I was going stir crazy, and go back to California and work in their offices in an environment of other programmers and people that I could learn from. And this took a while because Karateka has been a big success, and they were really eager to hire me, to have me come out and work for them as a programmer, but I didn't want that. I wanted to stay independent and repeat the arrangement that we had on Karateka, which was basically like book publishing, where I would be equivalent to a book author. I would sort of make the game on my own time. They wouldn't pay me, but they would have the right to publish it when it was done. So it kind of took a while to reach agreement on this. And finally we did. And I was very happy. I was able to move 3,000 miles away to San Rafael, California. And
okay, so we need that offset.
I had not only an office where I could go wherever I want with computers. I had other programmers in the office next door. It was a lot better than working in my room at home, I thought. And I also had my own car and rented an apartment. It was really my first, first time really living as an adult. And Prince of Persia was a title that my producer, Ed Badasov, came up with. At the time, I thought that this might make an okay tentative working title until we figured out what the real title was going to be. In the meantime, I was calling the game Thief of Baghdad. And of course, they still would have rather had Karateka 2. So a year after I shot this footage, I took it to the next step, which was, that looks dark from here. Can everybody see? Is there any way to brighten that? Maybe I can do it here. Let's see. You can see it? OK, cool. So having shot that footage, the challenge was to get it into the computer, which of course is something we can do now by pressing a button on a cell phone. But with the technology I had, it was a bit more of a challenge. And I experimented with various techniques and finally came upon a way that worked pretty well. This involved buying a VCR. This time I bought it for real. It had to be a VCR that had a clean freeze frame. So I set up a 35mm film camera on a tripod, drew the curtains to shut out the light from the room, and took a picture of the screen. Frame advanced the film, took another picture, frame advanced, took another picture, skipping every third frame so that it was 8 frames a second. So in this way, I exposed several rolls of film, took it down to the photomat, developed them, and then this gave me my flip book for the rotoscope. So here, what I did, I went with a black Sharpie and outlined the character, then used whiteout to sort of create a clean silhouette, which let me get to the next step of doing a black and white Xerox of that frame, which I then put on an animation stand, pointed a kind of a cheap black and white security type video camera at it, and there was a British company that made a card for the Apple II, which made it possible to digitize a frame, one frame of video. And so I captured this frame into the computer, and then I was able to use my own drawing tools to clean up the frames, cut them out, move them around. And this is what it looked like. That was a thrilling moment for me to, after 2 months of work, to see that character running and jumping on the screen. And this is what the character looked like after cleanup. So at this point, I had my kind of technical proof of concept. And I switched gears and really focused on game design. It's interesting, on every project I've worked on since, this always comes up, at the beginning. How do you start? Which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Do you start by making a game that's fun but ugly? Or do you start by trying to make something that looks like the game, that kind of gives you a vertical slice of gameplay, and then build out from there? So I won't pretend that there's one answer that works for every project, but for Prince of Persia, for what it's worth, I started like this, by getting a character running and jumping, and then I built the game out from that. And I built the world in a modular way. The idea being that I could build levels like LoadRunner in sort of a level editor, and so that I could quickly move around and recombine pieces to change the gameplay experience. Then I could play test and iterate very quickly. And this is what the game looked like 8 months in.
I should just
sort of going
clear the chat.
Along the idea that I would
zero viewers.
Get the game features working one by one, starting with pressure plates and gates, linking pressure plates and gates together. And you can see it's very slow. I was going to have to re-optimize the graphics routines many times after this. But I was building up the game so that I could actually play it at every stage. Now, the tools that I was using were these sort of cursor-driven, pixel-moving tools, keystroke-driven tools that it was really easy to crash. You had to know what not to do. In short, there were tools that only I could use and that only a programmer could love. And at a certain point, for the level editor, I really wanted to go beyond that and make a tool that was more fully featured. And this is the level editor that it took a few months of upfront investment to build. If you see, I had a menu screen where you could actually pick up pieces with this 3D scrolling cursor and then drop them into the environment. I was inspired partly by the Mac interface, but if I'm being honest, really by a game called Pinball Construction Set, which was the first Apple II game to use that sort of graphical Mac-type interface in a game. And it was a lot friendlier than having to memorize 15 different keys that you had to use. And so that's the way I did it. And I was going to all this effort, not just to make my own life easier, but because I had the idea that, like LoadRunner, I would include the level editor as a feature on the game disk so that people who bought the game could make their own levels. And then maybe we could have a contest for Prince of Persia levels and publish the best 50 levels as a championship Prince of Persia, that kind of thing. And for that, I had to make this level editor pretty bulletproof so that consumers, wouldn't accidentally create a level that would cause bugs.
Set relative location.
Now, I was coding, of course, but also at the same time, I was sort of switching hats between programming tools, programming the gameplay, and also thinking about what the gameplay should be, designing the story and the characters, as well as doing the art and animation. It was, my job title was programmer. All those other things were kind of extra. They weren't really recognized as, things that you might hire somebody to do separately from programming the game. And because of that, it went pretty slowly. I was doing these tasks sequentially. Obviously, a week that I spent working on a tool
It's still such an abstract concept to me of like looking for a job in this industry.
It
Seems such a like
gameplay
accepted
ideas.
everything as corporations, just like everything.
This is one gameplay idea that didn't make
Just
it.
everything is a corporation.
The moving wall.
Freaking
I thought it would be
everything.
too difficult to actually implement. About this time, Broderbund received a submission of a game from a Russian programmer, Alexei Patnikov, called Tetris. And submissions are supposed to be highly confidential, but somehow this one leaked out, and Roland Gustafsson, who's kind of the unsung hero of Prince of Persia and Karateka, Roland reverse engineered Tetris in an afternoon on the Apple II.
Why is YouTube
And so this
especially
sort of unofficial
weird?
copy of Tetris circulated among everybody in the office. And so I and all the other programmers stopped working on what we were doing to play Tetris and try to beat each other high scores. It was a considerable distraction. In the end, Broderbund didn't publish Tetris because although we were all addicted to the game, the conclusion was that this was a game that only programmers would like. It was... Now, Roland did the disk routines and the copy protection for both Karateka and Prince of Persia. He knew more about the Apple II than anybody I'd ever met. And he really raised my game, in terms of pushing this computer to its limits.
A little higher.
And my favorite entry out of all the journals I kept is one that I wrote on the morning when Roland had helped me upgrade from the assembler I was using to ProDOS and Merlin. And watching how we did it, and the recompiling code that he'd just written, like while I watched, just filled me with admiration.
Check if it's far away, so
his
it'll
hacker
disappear.
ethic. And so I wrote, quoting from my journal here, I wrote this at the world-weary age of 22.
Make a little sound when it happens.
Roland is 23, but he is still young at heart. And where did the screen go? Okay. So the game was starting to take shape, and I realized that there were other movements that I hadn't filmed the first time around that I was going to need. For example, running and jumping, grabbing onto a ledge, you have momentum. So I needed to film the character swinging on the ledge as well and see how a swinging body came to a dead hang, and then what it looks like when you drop from a dead hang. So I was able to take advantage of a visit from my brother, who is now a year and a half older and about 8 inches taller. But with the magic of my cartoonization process, I was able to correct for this to make all the footage fit. So we filmed this in the Broderbund parking lot.
VR editor selection changes.
I had a conversation with my producer in February about when I was going to be finished with this game, and concluded that I was going to be done in August, 6 months out. Little did I know that I was always going to be 6 months out from finishing.
Cool. The VR sense.
For at least the next 2 years. But
digital though.
Until now, I've been making pretty, slow but steady, consistent progress on the game. And
maybe if I make it fast and easier, dockable window open.
Okay, so the summer after college, that summer when I was at home, videotaping my brother and negotiating with Broderbund and programming tools, I'd also written a screenplay.
I can't change the speed of it.
Because that was also one of my dreams. And some of my friends from college, like George Hickenlooper, had gone out to LA he was trying to make it as a screenwriter and film director.
Controller
And that was
doesn't
really
replicate,
exciting
so
to me.
that should
It seemed like a long
work
shot.
out
It didn't
just
seem very
fine.
realistic.
Oh, I didn't try the door again.
Whereas making computer games was. I don't know. But anyway, through one thing and another, I had the screenplay. It was like a sort of a typical 80s movie. It was a thriller about a kid who's into cave exploring. And I'd given it to friends, and it eventually found its way into the hands of an agent in LA. And so now, against all odds, I got a call from a very nice lady named Virginia Garitlian, who is an agent at Leading Artists, saying, I've read your script, the head of the agency has read it, we love it, we want to represent you. Do you have any other movie ideas? Are you available to rewrite work? And how soon can you come down to LA? So I thought if I said tonight,
Just
it would
like
seem overeager, so I
they're just
said
there?
Next Monday.
We had to do like enable
And that
engine
was the
content or
beginning
something.
of my first Hollywood
Or,
adventure. It was terrifically exciting. Within 10 days, I had not only an agent, but a producer, Larry
I
Truman.
have these
who
things
produced,
because
The
I
Graduate,
did
and,
show
John
plugin
Carpenter's
content,
The
show
Thing.
engine content.
Curtis
So maybe
Hanson
that
wanted to
will
direct
enable it.
It really seemed like we were going to make the
Here?
movie. And so
Try that out.
I kind of got distracted and
Yep.
didn't work on Prince of Persia for a while.
He didn't do what?
Until
No.
I woke up one morning and realized that 8 months had gone by and we still hadn't made the movie. Pauline Kael once said that Hollywood is the only place where you can die of encouragement.
Wow.
And I figured that, I had this half-finished computer game waiting for me up in San Rafael. I really ought to finish it, and so I did. I went back to work. I still remember that feeling, that awful
Anybody got
feeling of
$200,000?
sitting down at this computer which had dust on it,
Speaking of Hollywood,
booting up the source code and looking at it and
It'd be
being unable
worth
to remember
it.
what any of those instructions meant. I felt like I was looking at code that had been written by somebody else. But over a couple of days,
Oh, that's perfect.
those mental gears got lubricated again, and I was back to advancing the game, putting in
Did you hear it?
features, and building up the gameplay step by step. This sketch interested me when I came across it because it reminded me that I did.
Firefox is slow. What's up with that? What's up with you, Firefox? Why are you being slow? Let me change the description.
I felt like I was looking at code that had been written by somebody else.
Alright, whatever. Could you hear the sound? I'm gonna put up the volume to max right now.
But over a couple of days, I kind of, those mental gears got lubricated again, and I was back to advancing the game, putting in. Thank you for your patience. This computer which had dust on it, and booting up the source code and looking at it and being unable to remember what any of those instructions meant. I felt like I was looking at code that had been written by somebody else. But over a couple of days, I kind of, those mental gears got lubricated again, and I was back to advancing the game, putting in features, building up the gameplay step by step. This sketch interested me when I came across it because it reminded me that I didn't plan out what the Prince of Persia gameplay was going to be ahead of time. I just started building it up, and so there were some emergent properties that I hadn't imagined. For example, I had loose floors, I had pressure plates that could open gates, but what happened when a loose floor fell on a pressure plate? I had to deal with that. I figured, well, okay, it should just stick open that gate so it can never close again. Or vice versa, if it's the kind of pressure plate that closes a gate, it can protect you from that. So new puzzle ideas came out of that, and it's something that I wasn't smart enough to anticipate that before I'd actually created it. The game still had the ability to surprise me. The story of the game was still very much in flux. I mean, I had a vague idea of what it was, but it was a lot more complicated than what I finally ended up with. There was an amulet, there was a genie, it was, I forgot the details. Okay, so I'd been doing everything up to this point on 5 1/4-inch floppies, and I had a really cool development system because not only did it have 2 drives, but it had 2 computers. That is, one for playtesting and one for coding, so that I was able to take the disk out of one drive, put it into the other on the other computer, and then immediately play what I just coded. And if it crashed, it wouldn't crash my development system, and that saved me a lot of time. So I thought this was pretty much the last word in development environments. But when I got to Broderbund, some of the other programmers told me about this thing called a hard drive. I'd never seen one, but it sounded really cool. And it was really expensive. And so it persuaded the head of product development to requisition one for me. And he did. And a year later, it arrived. And it changed my life. I could work a lot faster. Instead of having to switch disks every time I was working on a different source code file, I could keep all my source code files in memory on the same disk. It was great. And the game, of course, was still limited by the memory of the Apple II itself, 64K, or about the size of an average email message with no attachments. And this had to contain not only the screen, actually 2 screens because I was page flipping, but also all the shapes of animation, all sound effects, code, everything. And I was using every trick that I had to try to squeeze out a little extra shape for a few more frames of animation. And I was pretty much tapped out. Okay, so my best friend, Tommy Pierce, who was working in the office next door, creating educational software, whenever I had something cool up on the screen, I would show it to her, and she always said the same thing. She'd look at it, she'd say, combat, 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 and walk away, which drove me crazy, because I explained to her, the idea of this game, this was not a fighting game like Karateka, this was a puzzle game like Castles of Dr. Creep. And my basic concept was to create the most lifelike, fluidly animated human game character ever. And the trade-off of that was that there wasn't enough memory for 2. There couldn't be another character. But that was okay because the idea was that this was a character who was trying to survive, like Buster Keaton, in a world that was dangerous, where he was escaping death through all these violent traps. But he himself was not a violent person. He was surviving. He wasn't dishing it out. Basically limbo. And which is a great game, by the way. And if I had seen that when I was trying to make this game, I would have been like, yes, that's what I want this game to be. But Tommy wouldn't settle for that. Every time she saw, what I had, she'd just say those same 3 words that drove me crazy. And she just wouldn't let it go. She'd say, well, why can't you use the same shapes for your enemy like you did in Karateka? And I explained, look, in Karateka it worked because I could swap out the head and just, make the other character look, identical, but with this blue, evil, horned face, and so he looked like an enemy. But this character is too specific. He's got a personality that's expressed through his movements. He's cute. He's obviously the hero. You can't make the enemies look like that. And as I was explaining how the Apple II worked in a very patronizing, condescending way, I realized, wait a minute, what if I take each shape, each bite of the shape, shift it over 1 bit, exclusive OR it with itself, then the orange skin will turn white, the white body will turn black. and it'll have a sort of shimmering, ghostly outline around it. And I described this to Tomi, and her eyes lit up, and she said, "Shadow Man." And that's how Shadow Man was born, out of 3 lines of code. It was my friend Robert Cook, who I was sharing an office with, who suggested the idea that Shadow Man could come into being by jumping through a mirror. And once he was in the game, everyone loved him, and it was as if, yeah, he'd always existed. I couldn't imagine the game without him. Yeah. Okay, so this game that was supposed to take me a year to make, which I'd started a year late, I was now 3 years out of college, and the Apple II market had begun its long downward spiral. I'd been living off Karateka royalties for the last 3 years, and as mentioned, I wasn't drawing a salary. I didn't have an income, and at this point, the stream of royalties had dwindled down to a trickle. And I had made an Excel spreadsheet showing me the number of months that I had left, and that kind of woke me up. Also, at this time, I got a new producer, Brian Ehler. Had lobbied really hard to become the producer for this game, and he kind of lit a fire under me. Really got me thinking in terms of, rather than just sort of perfecting and improving the game indefinitely, what would it take to finish it? And so we made a schedule, got me on a schedule, and I agreed that I could finish the game in 6 months. And this is what the game looked like. Looks pretty close to the finished version, right? Yep. So, about this time, I became aware of a problem. It was, the game was getting close, but it wasn't actually much fun to play. I would, when people played it, it was beautiful. It totally impressed them. But they would pick up the joystick, they'd play it for a while, they'd say, "Oh, cool, beautiful, awesome." And then they'd put down the joystick and walk away. And I knew this was not a good sign. It was, I'd made a game, or that, as Gene Port would like to call it, was.
So I didn't realize I had my mic off for so long. That's stupid.
It just didn't have
How long
that.
was I
gotta
talking?
Keep playing quality. And Tomi, as usual,
Not
came up
talking,
with a pithy
I should
phrase
say.
to express this, which I
Alright,
recorded
so-
bitterly in my journal.
Why so shitty?
I like games where you can shoot things. Your game has no rewards except getting to the next level. It's all about survival and no triumph. And of course, she was right. So I had sort of a crisis where for about a week, I just re-examined all my assumptions about what I thought this game was going to be. And I went back and I looked at my first game, Karateka, which I'd sort of been dismissing as a very different kind of game, a simple, mindless, repetitive kind of gameplay, whereas Prince of Persia was going to be more sophisticated,
for me.
like a Lode Runner, Dr. Creep type game that really engaged your intellect, as well as your fingers on the buttons. And,
Shadow Depths.
but I realized that
And base
Karateka,
pass.
for all its simplicity, had some basic virtues that I'd been overlooking.
Dynamic.
I've speeded this up 4 times the original speed, so it doesn't take too long. Karateka,
Wasn't like this
you're always
before.
moving left to
I wonder
right.
what I've done
You
here.
knew what your goal was. It was
Is the stained glass
moving right
light on for
equal
some reason?
progress.
That's usually
Every
what
fight
happens. It's
had
because the
these
stained
strength
glass light
meters
is
so
like
that you
still
could tell
on.
at a glance whether you were winning or losing. And,
I
and
can't
your
work
goal,
like
not
this.
only
Let
the
me-
girl who was waiting at the end of the game, but along the way, every fight, every signpost, every gate told you you were getting closer to your goal. And, whoops. All these things that Prince of Persia lacks, Karateka had in spades. So I think, how can I get that kind of, emotional feeling into it? And here's another quote from my journal. I wrote, "How can I be so up on screenplay story structure and so blind when it comes to my own game? The story
have enough
doesn't move
memory to do
forward
both
until a
these
character
things.
wants something. A game doesn't move forward until the player wants something. Every event should move you closer or further away from your own from your goal, or it's not really a goal, it's just window dressing. So I had to tell my producer that we were actually further from our goal of alpha than we had been the week before. Why? Because I had thought about it over the weekend and decided that the game wasn't fun. Yeah, that wasn't a fun conversation. But they weren't paying me, so they couldn't fire me. So I set about reducing the scope of the game from 50 levels, which was sort of my load runner conception of it. That was all about puzzles, to sort of a simpler Karateka type game where it was going to be just 10 easy levels. You start in the dungeon, you work your way up to the palace, and end with the princess. Simple story. And with this, I also dumped the level editor that I'd lavished so many months on creating and making user-friendly. And this is my first pass of what eventually became the first level of the game. Luckily, because I had that level editor, it made it pretty easy for me to ditch everything I had and rebuild new levels, because these pieces were so easy to move around. But my next step, I realized, had to be to implement sword fighting, because without it, it was just too difficult to imagine in the abstract what the game was actually going to feel like to play. Yeah, that's me again. So I'd shot this reference footage a few months earlier.
It's so funny to see the exact animations.
Using all the knowledge that I'd gained in my one semester of mandatory high school fencing. But I felt it lacked something, a certain excitement, a certain je ne sais quoi. So as I was trying to figure out how to make sword fighting more exciting, I turned, of course, once again to my favorite childhood movies.
That's cool. I gotta see that one. Alright, so...
A little dark again, huh? Alright, so I watched this sequence, and there was a 6-second sequence where there's no cuts, and it's just Errol Flynn and Basil Rathbone fighting in profile. So I really analyzed that sequence, trying to see what it was that gave it that sort of back and forth, up and down Hollywood sword fight feeling. I did my photomat thing, got my flip book, and spread out those 36 frames on the floor of my office, and really broke it down, trying to figure out what they were doing in every frame. And out of that, I kind of came up with a tentative system to put that into the gameplay. I've been thinking that I was going to rent a camera and get some people to act out those moves, but I realized that actually everything that I needed was contained already in those 6 seconds of Robin Hood. With blithe disregard for copyright law, I took those frames, I gave it the Sharpie whiteout treatment, and in a few days I had it up and running in the game. And that was a thrill as big as when I got the character up and running for the first time. It totally changed the game. Those are 6 seconds. Those are the key frames out of which I got everything I needed.
The computer in general is just running like shit. This isn't how it was performing just a little while ago. What? Maybe I need to restart it. It's not the game. No, it's definitely not that. Okay, what the fuck? Let me, go back to the map. Here, maybe try just this real quick.
Welcome to the halls of creation.
Is it all the characters? because I've had plenty of characters before. I think it's my computer is just like chugging for some reason. Something in the memory. I don't know. I've had it on since earlier. I didn't reset it, so maybe that's why. Yeah.
Welcome to the halls of creation.
Okay, I'm restarting. I'll be back.